I sort of just happened to land there because of one internship. So that one internship was what got me started in New York City. And after a few years, I wasn't writing, I wasn't really doing what I felt I had studied. And so I started to look for another job, and I just got really lucky and I went over to InStyle, and I was there for about 4 years, and that was just awesome. A lot of red carpet reporting, news writing, editing, working on social media. And then after that, I went over to oprahmag.com, which is Oprah Magazine's website. Funnily enough, they didn't have a website. And so I went over to launch that site. So I was there for about 2 years. And then most recently, I left, and I'm now a freelance writer and editor, and I kind of get to work on projects at my own pace pretty much. And so yeah, that's kind of the big gist of what I've been working on.
Awesome. Well, I know that a lot of you guys, we muted so we can talk to Jonathan. I was going to start some of the questions off. If you follow Florida Scholastic Press on Instagram, we had an Instagram Q&A. So I'm going to answer some of those, but this session is really for you. So if you have any questions, I can moderate the chat, and then we could definitely ask Jonathan. But the first one I wanted to talk about is, who were some of your favorite celebrities or your favorite people to like interview when you were, when you're interviewing?
That's a good question. So I did a ton of celebrity interviews when I was at InStyle, because that magazine and that brand is so obsessed with Hollywood and all of that. My favorite, I would say when I was at Oprah, I got to interview the cast of Queer Eye on Netflix. And so they were amazing, and we had a whole photo shoot with them, and they were exactly what you see on the show is what they were like in person. So that was just really fun because it was a story that we worked on it was really collaborative. We had our in-house photographer, I was the writer, my editor was there. And so we wanted to tell a bigger story, not only about the show, but also about, what the show represents for viewers and Americans. And so they were awesome. And then this is maybe a funny answer, but I interviewed Kim Kardashian on the phone one time, and that was actually really nerve-wracking just because she's at the time was like the most famous person on the planet. But she was super nice and, smart. And the interview was about Lumi cases when that was a thing. So that was fun.
Okay, Lily wants to know, how did you decide what type of writing or journalism that you wanted to do? Also, before I say that, I wanted to tell everyone that we are recording. I forgot to tell everyone that.
So I decided pretty early on in college. I think, we kind of had the choice to work either for the student newspaper or the magazine. And I immediately gravitated towards magazine journalism. I knew I wanted to be in the fashion or entertainment world, and I was just obsessed with print magazines. And so it's funny because I was never, as growing up and even in high school, I wasn't very interested in fashion, but I think because a lot of the print magazines that I liked were fashion oriented, then that's sort of where I got my start and why I ended up working in fashion closets. But over time, my interest evolved, and I started wanting to work more in entertainment and tell more complicated, I guess, nuanced stories. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah, early on I just knew that I wanted to be in the lifestyle, entertainment, fashion categories.
So we have another one from Instagram. So what are some tips for ending high school and kind of how to start going into college journalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, well, this is sort of a basic tip, but one thing that I'd still find really important is to just read as much as you can. Read anything and everything that you can get your hands on. You can learn so much from other writers, and especially now on Twitter, there are so many different, and I'm happy to share them after this, but there are so many different accounts that are specific to journalists and where editors will give, how do I say this? They just give like free, really helpful feedback on story ideas, how to produce story ideas, you know, where journalists that you may follow online are getting those story ideas. And it's just really helpful and a good way for you to start absorbing this stuff as you're going into college and thinking about joining student media in college. So I think that that's one piece of advice that I would give is just, I actually think Twitter is a great tool for following other journalists, for keeping up with their work. There are so many people who will, you know, send a silly tweet and then in 2 months you see this like really beautifully reported essay or whatever that they've been working on. And a lot of stories come from social media. So
Awesome. And then there's not that many of us, so I can, if you also want to unmute yourself and ask a question, you can. But in the chat, it says, what stands out most to you in magazine journalism? Like you said you're gravitated towards that. So why did you gravitate towards magazines?
that's a good question. I was obsessed specifically with cover profiles, and I always would go to Publix or the grocery store and would buy the magazine and immediately go to the big cover feature. And I was just obsessed with those long, like 2,000 to 5,000 word feature stories. And I think I really wanted to do that and to tell those stories. And that I didn't realize at the time that that's really hard to do, and that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of experience for you to get to that level. But yeah, it was really the covers immediately grabbed my attention.
So now I'm coming back to some of our Instagram questions. So someone asked, what are some tips for finding like fresh content? Like how do you kind of create your story ideas for the website?
That's a good question as well. What I will say is that coming up with ideas isn't easy. And I think you know, if you're, let's just say you're trying to come up with something even for your yearbook or your newspaper now, and as you get into college, it's a challenge, and don't feel discouraged if nothing's coming to mind, because that definitely happens to me where I'm just like, I don't have any ideas right now. On the other hand, the biggest tip that I can think of is to just keep it simple. Some of the best stories that I read and some of the ones that I'm the most proud of are things that just happen in my life and observations that I have. And so don't try to overthink it. If there's a trend that you notice with your friends, that's a story. If there's a conversation that you're having in your text messages, or you and your friends are obsessed with something in your DMs, that could really turn into a story. And I'll try to think of like a concrete example of something like that. I think this sounds really silly, but I just wrote a piece for a website about literally dishwashing, which sounds so ridiculous, but I basically connected dishwashing and found, and I was writing about how in quarantine and during this virus, it's one of the things that I have to do every single day. And it's one of the things that has helped me just maintain a schedule and stick to a routine. And I was able to connect that to a lot of research that I found about mental health and how just having some sort of practice like that can be really beneficial. So even if you're on a walk and something silly pops into your head, that could definitely write it down and think about it, and it could become a story.
Sounds fun. I'll definitely have to check that one out. So Lily asked, how do you keep printed stories timely if they are changing very quickly? And I know, just aside here, like Florida school districts, they're changing like every hour. So how would you kind of create these printed stories timely if things are really changing?
That's a good question, and that's hard. And I think that's something that editors and writers who work in print media definitely think about every day. I would say if you're coming up with an idea that you know will have to still be relevant a couple months from now, just ask yourself that. Like, do you think that, you know, if the craziest thing on the planet happened, would people still want to read this story? And so if the answer is no, then potentially potentially it's time to maybe just reconsider the angle of the story or think of a different way of approaching it, because it is hard to achieve that, to make sure that something still is, you know, important a few months out.
Okay, so now this question is thinking back to high school you. So I was like, I'm thinking my high school self.
Yeah.
So how different was high school journalism from college?
Very different. And what's funny, to be honest, I was, I did work in student media in high school, but I don't know, I had different interests, I guess. I played volleyball, so that was kind of where a lot of my energy went. So I think that the biggest difference between high school and college that I noticed was that once I got to college, there was a lot more reporting, whereas in high school, perhaps some of the yearbook stories that we produced um, could have just been done on your own without too much background research. And so I think that for me, it became more enjoyable to write those stories in college, just because I really liked going up to other students on campus and asking them questions about, you know, what they're experiencing or what they're up to. So yeah, I think reporting was the biggest difference.
And you went to high school in Miami Lakes, right? So which
Yeah.
one? Which high school?
Barbara Goldman, which is, it's like Miami Lakes, Hialeah. Depends who you ask.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's District 7. So if anyone's here in District 7. Madeline had a great question. Like, dang. Is there a signature / routine way that you like to conduct interviews? And do you have any tips for interviewing?
Yeah. Well, is there a signature way that I like to conduct them? I don't know that I have a signature, but I think that I always, you know, just make sure. What I will say is that at the beginning of every interview, I will, even if we've already discussed it over email, for instance, I will always take a couple minutes to just reiterate the purpose of the story that I'm working on, just so that the subject understands why their quote could be beneficial. So I'll just give them a brief background of what I'm trying to accomplish with this story. Um, and then I just make sure throughout the interview that they're comfortable. It depends on the subject that we're talking about, but I just like to make sure that people feel you know, casual, and that they feel like they can trust me, and that that I'm somebody who will misquote them or won't misinterpret what they're saying. So I think listening is really important, just to make sure if there's something you maybe didn't understand, don't be afraid to ask them to repeat that same thing, because sometimes I've had it, especially early on, I've had instances where maybe they, you know, their sentences were broken up, and then I go back and transcribe it, and I'm like, wait, what were they actually talking about? And I don't remember. So then that's a chunk of the interview that I can't use, because you just don't want to, you know, publish that.
Okay. This is another Instagram question. So does college location, in your opinion, does college location matter when you're wanting to network with people in jobs?
That's a good question. I honestly don't. I don't think that it does. I think if you let's just say you're a college student in New York City, then you are going to have, it's going to perhaps be a little bit easier for you to get an internship or have access to people in media. But I think it's really important to remember that there's media all over the country and all over the world, and no matter where you are, you can absolutely network with other journalists. And I think especially moving forward, I really think that so many journalists and you know, whatever it is that you're interested in pursuing in the journalism world, a lot of people are going to be working remotely. So I wouldn't. So the answer is no. I think that you could do this job anywhere.
Okay, cool. And plus, in college, just to throw this out for some people, we do, you know, if you go to NSPA in high school, they have the same thing for college. So when Jonathan and I were in college, we would go to those national conventions just like you would in high school. So you could still have those networking opportunities. we also did not realize those were a thing.
Yeah.
We just went. So we didn't realize how big those things were. Okay, so this is one of our last Instagram questions, and we're probably going to start wrapping it up to be around 6:30. So if any of you guys have any final questions, definitely do that. So we have another Instagram. Well, actually, it wasn't an Instagram question. It's from Adam. So you talked earlier in your Q&A about being collaborative with your photo editor and your for your Queer Eye interview. So how do you kind of work together? Do you have any tips for more of that collaborative version of journalism to get the story done?
Yeah, definitely. That is super important, especially when you're trying to tell like a really layered story. My tip is to, I mean, it sounds very simple, I guess, but it's to really just sit down with your colleague, whether it's your photo editor or your online editor or whoever it may be, and just discuss what the goal is. Because, for example, in the Queer Eye story, we were interested in the angle that this show really amplifies the voices of the LGBTQ community and is important for that show to be on Netflix. And so we wanted the photos that went along with it to be really like happy and fun and playful, and to reflect like Jonathan Van Ness, for instance, who's so fun. And so, you know, had we not had that conversation, then perhaps the photographer would have gone in a different direction and would have shot photos that then wouldn't reflect the story that I wrote, which was one that was like really positive and happy. And I also think one of the best things that my editor at Oprah always like really, she pushed me to do this all the time. And sometimes it got a little bit annoying, but it was really helpful, was to always think of your headline before you even come up with an idea. Like that's the most important piece of it, because your headline is what's going to get people to either click on your story or to flip the page in the magazine. And so obviously that's going to change as you write the story, and you can tweak the headline. But if you just have a headline that can grasp what you're trying to achieve, then you can relate that to your photo editor, and hopefully, you know, it'll all work seamlessly.
Okay, so we have, we'll just have these last two as the final question. So I'll do Jenny's first. So what tips do you have for conducting interviews remotely in quarantine? How do you get the best quotes from someone without making it awkward in this current situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, I think it's important to understand that it might be awkward, and that's okay. And no one's going to, you know, think any less of you if the interview is off to a bumpy start. I've definitely had really awkward interviews on Zoom where, you know, maybe the person's camera's not working, or it just takes a couple minutes to get into the flow of it. So I think just, you know, forgive yourself if you mess up or if you're feeling nervous. We all feel it. I still feel nervous every time I'm interviewing someone. And I think that's healthy and that's natural, because it just means you're interested in the story that you're wanting to tell. So I think my tip is to just be yourself and be honest. And, you know, it's okay to say that you're nervous. And especially if it's your first time doing something, then people are really understanding, and no one expects you to do this as if you were a pro and, you know, in the field.
Okay, and then this is the last question from, I think it's Chan Son. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So what advice would you give for someone who is interested in fashion journalism to help get into the field later? So I think she means like college to career.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice that I firmly believe in is to try to intern. And, you know, that can be challenging, I think, especially because media is changing so rapidly. But that is the number one thing that I would say helped me get into the industry pretty quickly after college, because I was just obsessed with wanting to work in magazines. And so every summer, even some winter breaks, I just always had an internship lined up, and those were not easy to find. My parents, I don't come from a background that is very privileged. I had to work really, really hard to get those internships, none of which were I had one paid internship and the others were unpaid. So we can go into that another time. I had a lot of part-time jobs and all that stuff, but don't let that discourage you. There is definitely a way of pursuing those internships. If you ever, once you get there, please feel free to reach out and I'm happy to answer questions. But yes, interning, especially in fashion journalism or entertainment journalism, will get you, it'll really help and be really beneficial. And I think now the industry has really changed. When I was in it, sorry to be on this tangent, but when I was in it, things were a little bit more unfair and unpaid internships were a lot more common. Now there are they're calling them fellowships. And so you will get paid for your time there, depending where it is that you're looking to intern. So there are plenty of resources and yeah.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you so much, Jonathan, for coming and sitting down with us. I hope everyone who was on this call really liked it and got some great information. We kind of were rapid fire questioning, I feel like, but you gave some great answers and definitely had some good insight. So I wanted to thank you so much. And then if anyone is interested, we linked his Twitter account on the FSPA account. So you can follow and kind of see all of his professional journey. So
yeah, and yeah, once again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I am more than happy to help student journalists and help you get your foot in the door. So thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you guys so much. Bye.